A very good morning. Today is 27 June 2020. There are four articles of the Hindu editorial. The first article is regarding the guns, germs, and steel crisis. That is, the author compares the choices are clear to do nothing but getting out of the guns, that is from China, germs of that is coronavirus, and steel, the structure of India. And second article focuses upon the pandemic imposes a steep learning curve, online education system. And third article is the BJP have retained Manipur after another round of defections, but instability reigns. And the fourth final article is regarding the science versus nonsense on Patanjali's COVID-19 claims. Let's get started. If you're first to my channel, I request you all to subscribe so that you will not miss any further updates. The first article is getting out of guns, germs, and steel crisis. India faces a guns, germs, and steel crisis, to borrow from a little or the title of J. Diamond classical book on the evolution of society and nations. Guns, germs, and steel crisis, the fates of human societies. These are the Chinese guns on the borders, that is coronavirus, that is germs in our bodies. There are steel makers and other businesses on the verge of bankruptcy. Arguably, this is the gravest confluence of military, health, and economic crisis threatening our nation in more than a generation. Each of these would qualify as an independent large crisis by itself, warranting a specific resolution. The Chinese military threat calls for immediate and strategic action by our defense, foreign affairs establishments. The COVID-19 health epidemic is here to stay and needs constant monitoring by health ministry and local administration. The economic collapse is an enormous challenge that needs to be overcome with a prudent policy. The standoffs and Kargil parallel. The common thread across these is that the reduction or resolution requires significant financial resources. Standing up to a military threat by a superpower neighbor will pose an inevitable drain on the finances of the government. India's war against Pakistan in Kargil in May 1999 provides a hint of the financial burden of military threat. India's defense expenditure in a war year shot by nearly to 20% from the previous year. It also forced that then government to increase India's defense budget for the next financial year to 2.7% of a nominal GDP, the highest in the decades. China is far mightier power than Pakistan. In this phase of 20 Indian soldiers have been brutally killed and many other injured by the Chinese army. A portion of India's land in Ladakh had been grabbed by the China. Surely India is bound to arrest or assert its rights, which will necessitate higher expenditure. India's defense budget had been whittled down to just 2% of GDP for the financial year of 2021. Chinese defense budget is nearly 4 times larger. In all the likelihood, the Chinese conflict will stretch central government finances by an additional 1 or 2% points of GDP as India staves off the current threat and shores up its defense preparedness. The healthcare and economy sectors, like the health pandemic, had exposed India's woeful inadequate health infrastructure. The combined public health expenditure of states and the central government of India is a mere of 1.4 GDP compared to China's at 3% and America's at 9%. The COVID-19 epidemic is expected to linger on for another 2 years until a suitable vaccine is available at large. There are no options other than a significantly ramp up India's health expenditure. Many public health experts are of the opinions that the central government will need additional funds of this equivalent at least 1% or point of GDP to continue the fight against COVID-19. It is no secret that the extreme national lockdown had thrown India's economy into utter disarray. India's economy had four major drives: people spending on consumption, government spending, investment, and external trading. Spending by the people is the largest contributor to the India's economic growth every year. For every 100 rupees is an incremental GDP, 60 to 70% comes from the people's consumption spending. The lockdown shut off people from spending for 2 full months, which will contract India's economy for the first time in nearly 5 decades, regardless of a strong agriculture performance. Even prior to COVID-19, when the global economy was robust, India's trade levels have fallen from 55% of nominal GDP in 2014 to 40% in 2020. Now, with the global economy in tatters, trade is not a viable alternative to offset the loss of consumption. Investment is also a not viable option at this stage since the demand for goods and services has fallen drastically. Incremental funds needed, the only option that either to put money in the hands of the needy to stimulate immediate consumption or government to embark on the massive spending spree akin to the New Deal, which was a serious program and projects instituted by US President Franklin D. Roosevelt during the Great Depression of 1930. Based on the estimates of the loss of consumption, incomes and the multiplier impact, many estimate is that the government will need to inject incremental funds of 5% of GDP to absorb the economic shock and kickstart the spending cycle. Thus, India's guns, germs and steels crisis will impose a total financial burden of additional 8% of GDP on the central government exchequer. Where will the government get such a large lump sum amount from? The government had expected a nominal GDP growth of 10% this year. It's clear that GDP will not grow but shrink. There is always much hullabaloo about V-shaped economy recovery, where the mere illusion about 5% fall down and 10% growth next year will hail a sharp V-shaped recovery by economists and International Monetary Fund. But as a local grocery storekeeper will elucidate, it is only means that it has total sales and had a tad higher than 2 years ago. In a sum of the government needs to spend an additional 8% points of GDP, while the revenues will be lower by 2% of the GDP, a combined gap of 10% of GDP. Potential new sources of revenue such as wealth tax and large capital gains tax are ideas worth exploring for medium term, but will be much immediate help. The junk rating risk, the only option for the government to finance its needs to borrow copiously, will obviously push us in debt to ominous levels. When the government debt rises dramatically, there is a fourth dimensions of the guns, germs and steel crisis and junk crisis. With risking debt levels, international rating agencies will likely downgrade India's investment rating to junk, which will then trigger panic among the foreign investors. India thus faces a tough Dashartha dilemma: saves the country's borders, citizens and economy, or prevent a junk ratings. Some economists argue that there is a magical thread, a choices, but to simply print how much ever money the government needs to overcome these crises. Economic theory states that the money is printed at will, it can lead to massive spike in prices and inflation. This theory has fallen flat in the past decade in the developed nations such as America, where the creation of phantom money had not led to inflation. Hence, the Reserve Bank of India can just create a money at a will and transfer the government coffers electronically as it is augmented. There are multiple problems with this argument, but the most important one is that regardless of whether the money is printed or borrowed from others, it will also still be counted as a government debt is not escape a potential downgrade to junk rating. The US dollar, by virtue of being the world's reverse currency, it has built an inbuilt protection against the currency crisis that can be triggered by a printing of money that the other developing nations such as India do not possess. If there were indeed no costs of putting money whenever government needed, that's why the tax of citizen at all countries could just print money for all their expenses every year. The magical third choice is not magic, that it can give Indian government the money it needs and also prevent ratings of downgrade. The nation is at a precise or at extremely challenging moment in her history. How India emerges from this crisis will shape not just India's destiny but the world's. The government's choice are either to the bold and embark on the rescue mission, or do nothing and hope the situation resolves itself. On balance, it seems that the best course of action is to borrow unabashedly to pull India out of the guns, germs and steel crisis and deals with the consequences of the potential junk nation level. This is regarding the getting out of the guns, germs and steel crisis in this pandemic situation. The next article is the steep learning curve. Across the world, the education has been drastically affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Most instructions have moved online across the country. Schools, colleges, universities, research establishments have been shut with no idea of when it will be possible to safely reopen. Higher education has gone digital where possible, or else it has simply been to put on hold. In the wake of pandemic, other countries have embraced online education with a mixed enthusiasm. Many universities in the United Kingdom and United States have announced that coming academic year will be held mainly online. At the same time, educationists and policymakers advise cautions. Online education has not lived up to its potential. Given our diversity in instructions of higher education, private and government colleges and universities, research institutes, professional colleges, states and central universities, and so on, the Indian education system had a very heterogeneous response of this pandemic. The reactions also reflect the contrast in rural versus urban infrastructure, the variable quality of staff, and a diverse types of subjects that are taught. There are seriously, very surely, a long-term effects considering the scale of social, political, economic changes that had been occurring these past several months. Subject specific. From a purely pedagogic point of view, it is clear that technology will play a bigger role in the education in the coming years. However, it will have a highly subject specific courses that are traditionally needs a laboratory and practical component, or obvious examples where online classes cannot offer an alternative. The adoption of integrity of technology in education also depends on specific institution and its location. There is a huge digital divide in the countries in terms of bandwidth and reliable connectivity, as well as a very unequal access to funding. Beyond classroom lectures and courses, there has been a serious impact on academic research in all the disciplines. There is a need for close personal interaction and discussion in research supervision, and it is not clear when and how the doctoral research and supervision can resume. In addition, the related economic crisis have consequences for funding both on research as well as maintenance of research infrastructure. They are the long-term effects. A month ago, the teachers asked the students across India to share the experiences of education during the crisis and to discuss their personal views on the future, keeping their instructions and subject on the mind. The hard truths are some things are self-evident. Not all the students have equal access to the internet, and more than half of any class in any institution are simply not able to attend the lectures in a real time for what they were required. The more pronounced in the rural areas and non-metro cities for the lower income groups as well. Most teachers in India view online instructions with a caution, and the shift online is a response to the crisis was poorly planned. Online teaching is a separate didactic genre in itself, and one of its requirement is time investment and resources that are very few teachers could come up with in a hurry. Many online classes are poorly executed video versions of regular classrooms lectures. Across the board, teachers recognize that this is totally unsatisfactory. Online higher educations using MOOCs or massive open online classrooms have been encouraged by the Ministry of Human Resource and Development for some time now via NPTEL, that is National Program and Technology Enhanced Learning, and SWAYAM platforms. The SWAYAM means study webs of active learning for young aspiring minds. If this is to make serious difference, both quality and quantity of the online courses need to be enhanced. And there is a presently used argument classroom instruction, but if these can take a credit, it may help address the questions of access to quality education. There is a poor opportunity for change. This change to reimagine higher education in India, for the long time it has been elicited and exclusionary. Education has been less about learning and more about acquiring degrees. The pandemic can change that if it was earlier. Our higher education system can be more inclusive if going online loses the human touch. The advantage of being available to many more people who aspire to learn is the worth of trade. If giving protected examinations in the socially distanced world is more difficult, what needs to change is the idea of protracted examinations. There are simpler ways to validate pedagogy, some of which can be found by our own tradition. Gandhiji's Naithalim put a higher premium on self-study and experience and experimental learning. For instance, significant quality or quantity changes can come about if they planned very well. Digital tools such as artificial intelligence already used in teaching language can be adapted to deliver personalized instructions based on the learning which needs for each student. The use of AI can improve learning outcomes. In particularly, this can be a boon for teaching students who are differently able. The adoption of online education needs to be done with sensitivity. What is needed at this time is imagination and commitment of decentralization in education. Pedagogic material must be made available in other national languages. This is to extend access and can help overcome staff shortages that plague remote institutions. The state will bear much of the responsibility both to improve digital infrastructure and to ensure that every needy student have access to a laptop or smartphones. Campuses across India are desolate now, empty and inactive. Estimates that COVID-19 will be a seasonal, recurring every so often till 2022 or maybe 2024. So when these institutions reopen, there must be so extreme caution. Blended modes of education will be unavoidable. Online instruction where possible and limited contact for the laboratory instructions and individual mentoring. If this can lead to emergence of new pedagogic paradigm, we should have made a sweetness or the sweetest use of adversities. This is regarding the pandemic, which is imposing a steep learning curve during COVID-19. The next article is on Manipur politics. After winning the sole seat in Rajya Sabha elections in Manipur, the slender margin on June 19, and through dubious means and following a return of NPP's legislators to the ruling coalition fold, the BJP-led government had managed to stave off the crisis that threatened its survival. But fresh rumblings from other legislations from both BJP and coalition partner, the NPF and NPP's legislators retaining cabinet berths, suggest that the smooth sailing of N. Biren Singh-led regime is far from guaranteed. This was not unexpected. The government of Manipur came to power despite the BJP winning only 21 out of 60 assembly seats. 7 short of the Congress, that is 28, it managed to manufacture a majority by orchestrating a defections of Congress MLA who escaped any disciplinary action by the Speaker for the 3 years before Supreme Court weighed on its matter. The MLA had since on March 2020 had been disqualified, but there were 7 more defections from the Congress fold too from the earlier before the NPP suddenly withdrew and support from, and 3 BJP MLAs from the BJP crossed over. The Speaker saw it is fit only if it takes selective action against the defectors in a way which they did not upset the ruling coalition appeal card during the Rajya Sabha polls. The maneuvers behind the BJP's other advantages, power and center and control over the most states in Northeast have helped it stave off and the attempt by the Congress to push for no confidence motion. But these episodes only shine further light on the whimsical nature of political allegiance in the northeastern states. It is difficult for desperate or the disparate political forces to come together in the case of hung assemblies or parliament. Forming a post-poll coalition that is not based on simply a division of laws of power requires the parties to come into pragmatic understanding and governance priorities. The common minimum program be a method which sometimes results in a parties resorting the brinkmanship of the issue that had been cited, but this allows for the battle and wits between the different outfits in the same alliance while reflecting the electoral mandate more truly, and is therefore a principalized form of coalition building. Regarding the Manipur politics, how BJP had retained Manipur after another round of defections, but instability had reigned. The next article is on science versus nonsense. Patanjali claims of COVID-19. The unrelenting spread of COVID-19 has set off both mass anxiety and clamor for Paneka, or fear paves that a ways of profiteers. Patanjali's Ayurveda recent claims have discovered a cure and publicized that garnered bypassing every regulatory requirement without any serious consequences. So far, it shows that India's regulatory checks and balancing are wanting. The company said that in Haridwar that the product Coronil had cured everyone in the clinical trial, while a quackery and potency of magic drug are a part of life in India. Its declarations could not be ignored because of the tremendous influence of its product wield, and its claim have proved that the product through a clinical trial, which makes it open to evaluation by the standards of modern medicine. As it now emerges, the company had probably misrepresented the drug's efficacy. The clinical trial tested the drug on 45 and another of 50 were administered placebo. All the participants had tested positive for the virus. On third day, 31 of who were given the drug recovered, and 25 of those who were in placebo recovered. This is not a measurable improvement considering the small number enrolled in the trial. Moreover, they were mildly symptomatic. Ramdev claimed that the 7th day all that had recovered. If this also included all those who had on a placebo, then it further weakens the claims that it was a drug alone that worked. The doctor in the trial has spelled out in a clinical trials registry that the process they would employ to test the drug, but said that neither published their results nor submitted it for the peer review. Therefore, the company's claim of a cure by all accounts was clear subversion of the scientific process. While the hydrochloroquine was being touted as a potential wonder drug for COVID-19, some of the Indian scientists were quick to join the global that raised a methodological issue with the study of Lancet that claimed no effect and even harm from the hydrochloroquine. These studies retraced and relied on a spurious database, but its overall finding that hydrochloroquine doesn't work has been borne out by the other validated studies. Thus, more than the outcome, it is the method deployed that ought to be scrutinized by the scientists to reinforce public trust in the scientific assessment. There has always been a tension between the traditional Indian system of medicine and pharmaceutical drugs, but there is now consensus in India's regulatory system that claims by both systems are developing safe, efficacious drugs must pass clinical trials. It is well within the domain of the institution of ICMR, Indian Council of Medical Research, and CSIR or National Science Academics to call out breach due to the process of the appraisal of any drug, whether allopathic or Ayurvedic or homeopathic. That to not do so much would amount for a criminal negligence. This is regarding the science versus non-science on Patanjali's COVID-19 claims, as ICMR and CSIR must call out for any breach due to the process in the appraisal of any drug. That's the end of article discussion. This is my Facebook and Instagram link. You can follow. I'll give the link in the description so that you can just click on follow me. Thanks for joining me. Before I conclude, I request you all to subscribe to my channel so that you will not miss any updates. Thank you. Have a great day.